I can't hear anything. Is everything okay?
Yeah, we're silent until we get a few more attendees in,
Okay, good. I
so
wondered.
they don't miss the beginning. Yeah, we're gonna go in just a second.
Okay. Very good. I had to lock my cat up into the bedroom because she'll be all over the table here. Hopefully she stays quiet up there.
Yeah. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Bread Bakers Guild of America afternoon session with Chef Marina Bransley. Marina is a senior instructor at Johnson & Wales, the International Baking and Pastry Institute at the CFIT, the College of Food and Innovation Technology. Did I get that right?
Food innovation and technology, yeah.
And food innovation and technology. Marina is also currently working on her master's in the gastronomy program at BU on food history and culture. So I hope today a lot of your class, you'll inflect the class with some of the history. I just want to quickly note that Ronnie just texted in that she has 3 cats, so she's with you and she's ready to get started. So Marina, take it away.
Oh, well, hello everyone, welcome. Welcome to my home kitchen. Like a lot of people experience, even professionals, when you're working at home, it's so much different than when you're working in the industry, and the doughs perform differently. Everything is so different. So it's a challenge even for us professionals. So today I'm gonna demo a couple puff pastry items. There's 2 different types of puff pastry dough, what we call Blitz Puff. It's also called rough puff. And then there's a classic puff pastry. And basically the difference between the 2 is Blitz Puff is more like a really fancy pie dough. You get some more layers and more flakiness from it than you would pie dough. And then the classic puff pastry is a little more labor intensive. The butter's worked into the dough a little bit differently, and you get some really dramatic layers and height out of the dough that you don't necessarily get with the Blitz Puff. But the Blitz Puff is really good for a lot of things. Let me show you here a couple items that I'm going to demo today. This is just a Frangipane strawberry rhubarb tart, and it has a puff pastry base. We'll cut out a little, almost like a tart shell. We'll fill it with Frangipane, a little bit of rhubarb strawberry jam, bake the strawberries right on top, and so we'll take you through that one. And then the other one is a classic puff pastry item called jalousie. And jalousie is the name, a French name for shutter or blind. And so it's supposed to resemble a shutter or a blind, a Venetian blind with the slats going down the middle. And this is filled with some stone fruits. I've got white peaches, yellow peaches, cherries, some blackberries. So we'll just take you through that as well.
Marina, can I ask a quick question? You said that the do you decide, would you say that puff pastry and Blitz puff pastry are interchangeable, or you prefer Blitz for some things and the traditional for others?
They're pretty interchangeable. Okay. I would say the only difference being that, you know, the classic puff is going to give you some really nice height to your pastry. Well, maybe a little bit more than what you see here. You know, this has actually got some pretty good height considering it was warm when I made the dough, and the idea is keeping the dough really cold so that you get a lot of layers. So actually not bad for Blitz puff pastry. Well,
one of the reasons we asked you to do this is that your Blitz puff pastry products look as good as a lot of other bakers' puff pastry items. And I wanted to have you share what you do because it's such a time saver. And quite often, it's very close results when you handle it.
Yeah, and this one tastes so great. Well, actually, both the puff recipes that I use, I think, are pretty good. My classic puff has about 130% fat in it compared to the flour. This one has, you can see, if you're looking at the recipe, has 100% fat. And I've thought about maybe trying to increase the butter on this one so that you get a little bit more flakiness and flavor, but I haven't quite tried that yet. But let me talk about the ingredients, because the butter is very important in your puff dough, because it's the fat content that really counts. That's really going to make those flaky layers. If you're using a butter that is too high in water content, it's probably going to taste okay, but you won't get a really nice flaky dough. So if you have a recipe in front of you, you'll notice that it says butter, but it doesn't say what kind. So in this dough today, I'm using this brand here. It has the percentage of fat listed right on here, 85%. The other brand that I've used, let me pull that one out. Actually, I've used both of these. Can you see that all right? Oh, it looks like we lost Mitch.
I was muted. I'm sorry. Yes,
okay.
we can see very well. Thank you.
Okay. This one here, Nellie's has 84%. The bottom one has 85. When I did a taste test side by side, I kind of preferred the Vital Farms one, but they seem to perform pretty well. So anything above 83 probably would work well. Not all the butters will show you the percentage of fat in the grocery store. It's nice that these two do.
And I imagine the difference in the flavor might not just be the fat, that would be the mouthfeel, but the flavor would be from the cows, where they were, how they were managed.
Right. Yeah, right. This one happens to be grass-fed. The other one that I was considering using was that one from May, or the Irish one. What is that one called? Does anybody, do you know?
Kerrygold.
Yeah, that one looks like it has a very high fat content. They don't list it, but the content in grams is listed as 12 grams per serving, whereas this is also 12 grams. So it's probably pretty high up there. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on this dough. So before, during the morning, as I was prepping for this class, I have my flour, my butter cut up in here. I have my water chilled overnight in the cooler. And you can see that I have a little wine in this recipe, and I've used wine in my classic puff recipe, and I really, really like the results. It's just, you can't really tell it's there. It adds a nice little essence to it. And I kind of think it creates a nice little lightness to the dough as well. So there's a mixture of water. It's in the fridge. You keep it nice and cold so that when we introduce it into the dough, it keeps the butter and the fat cold. And so you can do this by hand or machine. If I'm in the industry doing a large volume of dough, I'm probably going to use a machine with either a paddle or a dough hook. And the idea is you don't want to overwork the fat into the flour too much. So let me go ahead. Can you guys see okay as I work this?
Yes. And while you do that, we have a question from Kathleen.
Okay.
Would the whey that's left over from making ricotta be sufficient? Would that be okay to use for the liquid here, for the water?
Actually, I never tried it. It might, you know, it may help in browning. Do you think it would help in browning?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, I can't, you know, you might need a little more whey than the water because there's still solids in the whey. So 100 grams of water, 100 grams of whey are not 100 grams of water.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out, you know, how that works.
Kathleen, report back to us.
Yeah.
And she,
yeah.
okay.
Anytime you have dairy in your dough, it's going to add flavor and color, crust color when you bake it off.
Absolutely. Lactose, even in bread, lactose is not fermentable and increases the color. So what are you looking for right now?
What I'm doing is I'm just pressing the fat down a little bit, working it into the flour just a little bit, but you don't want to overwork it into the flour. And one thing I always caution my students is that if you overwork the butter into the flour, it starts to turn yellow. The fat begins to coat the starch particles. And when you go to add your liquid, the liquid's not going to absorb properly, and it's going to be a little bit soupy in the bottom of your bowl. So you want to be a little careful. And at this stage, since I still have the water to go in here, I'm going to continue working it as the water goes in. So you want to kind of stop a little earlier. Can you see that all right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, time for the liquid.
if you could, would you take a handful and extend it closer to the oven, to the camera? One of the, yeah. Yeah, that's it. So you can see the random size pieces right now, and you're looking for an average, I guess.
Yeah, some people leave them really chunky and really large. It will just depend on how much you work the dough, how you roll the dough, how long you roll the dough, because you don't want the chunks, you do want the chunks to kind of be layered in the dough after you're done rolling and folding the dough together. So I kind of stop right here. And since I'm going to be working a little bit more with this, my bowl scraper, and putting the liquid in, it's going to continue to get cut in and get smaller. So
Got it.
if this feels a little warm to you when you're doing this, just put the whole bowl back into the fridge to chill it back down. And then you can continue once it's cold again. Some people have hot hands, you know, when they go to work the fat, it just melts. And you don't want the fat to get overworked in there. So I have my liquid here, the wine's in there, the water's in there. And what I do is I just pour about a third in, and I move it around and begin to cut in the fat a little bit more, and also work in the water.
But you're going to avoid making a paste at this point, I imagine.
Right, yeah, you don't want to make a paste. And you don't want to add it too slowly, about a third at a time. What you're looking for is this dough, all the flour needs to be hydrated. Once it's hydrated, I'm going to put it on the board and gather it together.
You know, it's interesting that you're using the white wine, I imagine. It's white wine, I guess, in the Blitz, because I've seen it in traditional Italian puff pastry as a tenderizer, and I never thought of trying it in the Blitz, so that's really great.
Yeah, I just thought about it, you know, as I was thinking about this demo, I thought I've been using it in my classic puff for years, really like the results, and why not try it here? And it seems to work out really nicely.
Great.
And like you say, you know, a lot of people put vinegar or lemon in their dough to help relax the gluten. So the wine has a little acidity too. And it's only going to help do the same thing.
When you worked, say like at Blue Ginger for Ming Tsai, did you use puff pastry there in the restaurant?
You know, we didn't use a lot of puff. We used phyllo.
Yeah.
For a variety of things. But you know, puff pastry is kind of heavy, and if you don't make it right, and if you don't roll it thin enough, when you use it in a dessert, and especially if you're working in a restaurant that's going to be serving multi-course courses, to try to use puff pastry for a dessert, you have to use it very carefully.
So puff pastry in your mind is pastry and too heavy for dessert in a way.
Yeah, if you were to serve, like, these pastries here are more for like afternoon tea, afternoon pastry. You may not serve this as a dessert in a restaurant.
Got it.
But you certainly could use phyllo or puff as a component of a dessert. You would just have to make sure that it's not too thick, or you don't, you know, use too much of it. So let me kind of show you where I'm at here. You see how I'm turning it over like this? And I'm looking for the dough to get moist. And if you look at the bottom of the bowl and you keep turning it over like this, if it looks a little dry and a little powdery still, just keep cutting it in. It's just about there.
And you are using cake flour and bread flour. Would you address that just a little bit, please?
Sure. What I've discovered is, you know, a lot of people might use pastry flour, but pastry flour, if you don't know how much protein content is in there, it tends to be too tough. And so whenever I'm working in whether I'm in the industry or at home, I'm usually going to combine bread flour and cake flour so that you soften the flour a little bit so it's not so strong. You know, bread flour, if I used all bread flour, it would just make a tough pastry. If you use all cake flour, you're not going to have enough structure. So I kind of like the combination of making my own pastry flour by using various ratios of bread and cake flour.
And what's the bread flour you're using? You don't have to specify the brand, but do you know the approximate protein level?
This one is about 12%. It's the King Arthur brand, you know.
Okay, it's the Galahad / all-purpose.
You know, it's the blue label.
Oh, really?
12.7.
Okay.
Seen that in the grocery store.
Thank you.
And also, I'm using their cake flour as well. Okay, so this is ready to put on the board. You see how it's all moist? Can you see very well?
Can you hold it a little closer to one of the cameras in the book? Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, so it just goes right on the board. Yeah, you know, in the pastry shop too, we tend to just keep, in the industry anyway, in the shops that I worked at, I would just keep bread and cake because, like I said, you can mix your own ratio of flour, strength of flour, rather than carrying so many different types of flours.
We could also mention that besides working for En Ming, as long as we're talking about bread and bread flour, you did work for someone named Craig Ponsford, or worked with him at one point.
Oh, yeah, very short time there. When I left CIA, I went over to work with him for a little while. And he had quite the operation there. It was amazing.
A short time with Craig is a great time.
It is. You learn so much. You can just
Yep.
a little bit.
Okay, so now.
Kind of show you here. You can kind of see there's still a lot of fat there, right?
Yes.
And you want to press it into, I like to do a rectangle. So I just push it together. And now I'm going to start to roll it, but I want to add a little flour to my board.
And which flour are you using on the bench?
Yep, this is bread flour.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. You don't want anything underneath your dough, like any little bits and pieces that are stuck to the board, because that's only going to make your dough stick as you try to. And you know, the first couple times rolling this thing, you have to be careful and just keep redusting underneath. Make sure it always can move, or else you're just going to roll it into the bench. So I roll this out to about 10 by 16. Give it a fold. Even at this stage, you got to make sure, see how it's still moving?
Yes.
Yeah, you gotta. That's what I find, you know, students have a lot of trouble with, is they keep rolling and rolling and rolling, and before you know it, it's stuck to the board, and then it's really difficult to work with.
That, and you know, I've seen, whether it's in school or on the job, beginners are just pretty heavy-handed with a rolling pin when they start too. You know, really banging it around and too much pressure sometimes.
Yep.
It takes a light touch here too, or a measured touch.
Okay, so I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to put it in the freezer for a few minutes, just chill it down. It's kind of humid in here, kind of hot. And one of the keys to puff is to keep the fat cold. So brush off the extra flour. You don't want to keep folding all those bits and pieces in there. And we're gonna do 4 4-fold. So a 4-fold is like a book fold, like this, and then like this. A 3-fold is like this. So you could do either, but we're gonna put 4 4-folds. I tend to offset the seam just a little bit. Match up the ends. You want them kind of matching up. Can you kind of see?
Yes, that looks good.
Then I'm just going to press it together a little bit. It looks pretty shaggy right now, but it will come together really nicely.
You know, we, the Bread Bakers Guild has, on the viennoiserie exam, there is a Blitz Puff Pastry exercise. We consider it a real good marker of skill.
Yes.
If you can do it, and it fits into the timeline of the test, but we wanted something to measure a skill, and this is really a good measure.
Yeah, it is. You can watch how people handle the dough, how they work at the bench, you know, like, you know, all these different techniques. You know, that's how we hire people in the industry, right? We bring them in, we have them trail, we see if they like working with us, they see if they like working with you, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it. I'm going to put it in the freezer, probably only about 15 minutes. And then I'm going to give it another fold right away. Some chefs will do 2 back to back right away, but like I said, it's pretty hot in here. It's kind of muggy, so it's really important to keep the dough cold. You want to wrap it pretty tightly. Yeah, just put it on something that's easy to move around. In the freezer for a few minutes. So are there any questions, Mitch, you think about that maybe we should take now, if anybody has?
No, but I want to ask, if I just got a message from one of the students saying that when I talk, I'm blocking the images, and I've got my camera off. So I'm going to ask if Rebecca can help with that.
Oh, you know, I've noticed that, Mitch, when I watched a video. I think whoever is speaking, they become the primary person on the video.
Well, but I have the camera off, so I don't understand. If one of the attendees could message what's going on, it would help me understand. Okay, somebody just told me to go to gallery view. Who? Betsy, thank you, Betsy. Is that better? Okay, some people are getting it and some people aren't.
All right, so we're going to move on to doing some frangipane. Now, frangipane is just an almond custard cream, an almond cream that we use for fillings for danishes, various viennoiserie, tarts. It can be made using a lot of different ratios. This one's a pretty soft one. This one could also be used inside of a tart, like we're doing today.
Would you use this one for Petivier?
Yes, actually, I do use this one, this exact one for Petivier. Let me get organized here. So I'm going to use the mixer for this one. And I just tidy up here before we move on to the next thing.
I really like the way you scrape all the flour off of everything and brush, even off of your hand tools, and get it back into the production.
Yeah, or else it ends up everywhere, right?
Everywhere except where it belongs.
Okay, so this one has, I have butter here. We're going to start what we call with the standard creaming method, where you take your butter and your sugar and you cream it in the mixing bowl until, with the paddle attachment, until it's light and airy. I'm using a vanilla paste. You can see that little blob there. Rather than vanilla extract today, I just happen to have it and I'm out of extract, so I just add a little vanilla bean paste. And I'll move the camera here in just a second. Let's see. Can you see that okay? Should I put it higher?
No, that's good. We can't see in the mixer, but we can, maybe when you raise it, yeah, we can't see inside, and I don't think we'll be able to, but you could just lower the bowl and tilt it and show us as you go.
Okay, yeah, I'll pull it off. So when you're creaming, very important to keep bring the butter up to room temperature. If the butter's too cold, it won't open up and let the air in as you cream. If the butter is too warm, it won't hold the air in. So room temperature, we usually say 65, 70 degrees. This one can be a little bit warmer because it's not like a pound cake where we're really trying to hold the air in the batter and we're using the air to leaven the cake. We're mainly just using the air in the batter for texture. So we'll just let it go a little bit. And with this one here, I tend to add my almond flour in pretty quickly. It's not like the flour has any gluten, so when you mix it with the fat, you're not going to develop any gluten. I also use the almond flour as a binding agent, so when I'm adding the eggs and the liquid, it helps to kind of bind everything together.
So you're going to medium speed.
Yeah. Pull it off. Let's see. Can you? Oops.
Yes, thank you.
We'll do a little scrape. I'll add the almond flour right away, and then I'll get the eggs in there. You can also do this by hand. If I was doing just a half recipe, I would just do it by hand. You may not get as much air in there.
Do you ever add flour to your frangipane?
I haven't, but I've seen it in recipes before.
Yeah, me too. But I haven't done it.
Yeah, I guess as long as you don't add too much, right? It'll be more cakey if you start adding too much flour.
Right.
All right, so I have the eggs. So I'm actually doing a double recipe based upon what's there. So I have 2 eggs in there, scrambled them up a little bit. The cream, we could add the cream right into the eggs. I have the rum in there as well. Now, one of the things that helps with the egg here, a lot of people know that the egg yolk has this natural lecithin in it that helps bind things together. And so when you're adding the eggs to whatever mixture you're making, whether it be a cake or a filling like this, you want to add them really slowly.
Does it matter if you use white or dark rum?
I use dark rum, but it doesn't matter. I have Myers rum in here. I just really like the flavor and the smell. But you could use brandy.
Right.
Make sure that pastry's not getting too cold. You don't want it to freeze. Okay, once the frangipan is kind of doing its thing here, we'll take the dough back out and do another fold. We'll just let this frangipan kind of mix and aerate really well.
And the amount of cream is not insignificant, but it's pretty low. Why do you include that? Is that more browning again?
I would say it adds more to the texture and just moisture of the filling.
Okay, thank you.
They add a little browning to it, and you can see that the pastry does get a little bit brown, like this is the frangipane right around here. So it does brown nicely. So many European pastries have the frangipane in them.
You know, I love the way you're using it today with the tart. We did a lot of that in the resort in the summer. When you're doing a banquet with fruit tart, it's better to do frangipane and maybe just put just a thin layer of pastry cream to hold the fruit to it. And it's cleaner and easier for people to eat.
Right, yeah, and it also doesn't, it helps to keep the crust from getting soggy if you just
Absolutely. Yeah, good point.
I wanted to show you, that brings the, I'm glad you mentioned that because I made a shell from the pastry, and just to show, you know, this is what the shell looks like without any of the filling baked into it. So you could put pastry cream in here and then use it as a fruit tart, put a nice design of fruit in there, glaze it with a little bit of glaze and make it shiny. So that is another way to go about this.
What are you going to do with all the pastry in your house after this class?
Oh my goodness. I guess it's going to stay in the freezer for a little while. But it's nice to have in the freezer, right? When you want to make an apple galette or apple tart or some quick pastry, it's all rolled out. All I have to do is just bring it out and get the fruit ready.
Oh, great.
So this is looking pretty good.
Betsy's asking how you got the shell into that shape. Was it just a disc and then you do the knife around the edges, or you're going to show that later, right?
Yeah, I'm going to demo that and I'll show you
Okay.
where you can either bake it without a filling like that.
Okay.
Or to fill it. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Can you see that? See how fluffy it's getting?
Oh yeah, it's aerated.
Yeah, it's nicely aerated, but I have a little more egg to add there. So let me just scrape it. Make sure there's nothing solid along the edge there. Make sure everything gets mixed up. This little mixer is like 30 years old. It's still going.
Clearly you never made bread in it, or not much bread then.
I've made stollen in it actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but in order to get all the fruit in there, you have to dump it, the dough out, and hand fold in all the fruit. Although I do want one of those 8-quart mixers, that just makes your life a little easier.
I believe the motor is a little stronger in that one too.
Yeah. So the other thing is, just one last comment here before I get everything in there, or as it comes together. Make sure your eggs are room temp too, because you added the cold eggs to the emulsified butter. You're going to break that emulsion. It's going to look like cottage cheese. So you want to, I usually put my eggs in a cup of warm water and let them curdle a little bit. Then I crack them. And it keeps everything nice and smooth when you're adding room temperature eggs. All right, I think this is good. we'll just set this aside for a little while. Okay, how's that look?
Good. And you could make that days ahead and take some out when you need it. And would you re-whip it at that point to get it spreadable, or just let it sit out a while?
Yeah, I do. I either put it in a bowl and I just hand paddle it, or you can put it back in the mixer and whip it back up, and it'll be nice and soft and pipeable, because I'm going to pipe this batter. But you could spread it too if you had to. You know, you could just spread it with a spatula. Okay, let's bring that dough back out. The other thing you want to do too, some of you guys might be already proficient at making puff dough, but we always keep track of the folds. So a lot of the old time bakers will put a little dimple in it so that when they take it back out of the freezer or fridge, they know, yes, I've done one fold, or 2 dimples. Yes, I've done 2 folds. But I also write the time, like when I'm in the classroom or when I'm in a busy kitchen, I will write the time that I put it in the cooler as well, so that I know how long it's been in there. You don't want the fat to get too cold, or else it won't continue to elongate through your pastry. As you roll it, it'll just be a little too chunky. Nice little coating of flour down. And I don't know, did you ask me, Mitch, already why I use bread flour on the bench, or?
I didn't ask, but will you explain it?
Oh, yes, okay. So the bread flour is a little more sandy in texture, and it provides a nice little coating, whereas cake flour might bunch up a little bit too much. It doesn't really coat it as well as bread flour does. And the other thing is I dry off my pastry too, because it gets a little condensation in there, and you don't want it, you know, it's going to be a little gummy if it's wet. So dust both sides. And when you bring the dough back out, you want to put it lengthways this way. You're going to roll long this way and wide this way, approximately 10 by 14 to 16. Maybe a little longer as we get down to the last couple folds. Keep moving your pastry every time you roll it. You want to make sure that it can move, or if you're, like I said earlier, if you are rolling and not moving it, it's going to get stuck to the bench. So you see the butter, how it's starting to ribbon in the pastry? Can you see it very well?
Not really. If you move it closer, we may be able to.
You see the ribbons beginning to form?
Yes.
And you know, you want to roll as evenly as possible. Move the pastry around a little bit, flip it over so that you're not always rolling in one spot. I like to, you want to try to keep it rectangle. So if you pull the corners out this way, it tends to help to keep it a little rectangular. The other thing is, so I have 2 rolling pins here. I have this one, which is a little heavier, and it helps move the pastry out a little bit better. This was a Ming Tsai gift. Oh, a little crooked there. He was a really great guy to work for. All right, can you still see all right?
Looking good.
Now, I like the French pin with the tapered ends because it's allows me to get these little chunky pieces rolled out where I want them to be and move them in the direction that I want them to be moved in. Versus when you just have that straight pin, you know, sometimes you can't maneuver the dough, manipulate the dough like you would like to. So this is pretty good here. Let's see where I definitely am at 16, somewhere around 10 by 16. So I'm going to stop here. And there's still quite a bit of butter there, you can see. Brush the flour off the dough. Even though it doesn't look like there's much there. Square your pastry up, and we give it another 4-fold. Make sure that they meet, you know, you don't want a big gap there. So make sure it kind of meets.
And it's beginning to look a lot more uniform.
Yeah. Yeah, after the second fold. If it's a little chunky or uneven, you can roll it at this stage too. I often like to do that just to even it out. And then see how the seam stays on the bottom rather than increase here. I don't know, just something I picked up from somebody. It made sense one time. And I thought, oh, okay, that's a good idea. Even it out so that it's not too thick. You know, when you put it in the fridge or freezer, it just makes it easier to roll when you bring it back out.
And it cools more quickly too.
Oh, right. Yeah, definitely. That's the main thing. And then the other thing is, especially in a hot summer day when it's hot in your kitchen or hot in the workspace that you work at, you want to make sure that when you place your hand on the dough, it should always feel rather cold. So if it doesn't feel cold, you got to get it back in the fridge right away, no matter what stage you're at. Just kind of stop, let it chill, come back to it.
Marina, we have a question. Someone would like to interact with you. Sonia, you ready? Go ahead, Sonia.
Would a marble rolling pin work as well?
Yeah, marble probably would work all right. Have you used the marble before?
It's the only one I own. I just didn't know if it was too heavy.
No, the weight probably is good. This one's quite heavy, actually. That's what I like about it. I like actually having two. What I noticed about marble, as far as rolling on a wood surface versus a marble surface, is that it's more difficult to roll the pastry on marble than it is on wood, because for one thing, the flour doesn't stick to the marble as well. And so the coating on the bench doesn't stay as nicely evenly underneath the dough as well as it does on a wooden board.
No, I'm sorry. I should have been more specific. A marble rolling pin?
Yeah, no, I understood. Yeah, the rolling pin probably would work well. The only thing I could think of too is that I tend to coat my rolling pins with flour so the dough doesn't stick to the pin. That's the only problem that you might have, which I have with this. Sometimes I experience that with this stainless steel roller.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure I specified rolling pin. Thank you.
Yeah, you did. So now I put that in the freezer. If I was, you know, at work where the refrigerators are really, really cold, I would just put it in the refrigerator, but I'm trying to speed up the process a little bit. But one thing to keep in mind when you use the freezer is don't let it get hard. So leave it in there 10 or 15 minutes, move it to the fridge. And then we just want to make sure we don't leave it in there too long. So it's 1:45. So just write that down somewhere so I remember. Okay, so we are now ready to make some rhubarb.
While you're back there, Marina, why don't you tell us a little bit about your teaching at Johnson & Wales? I know this past year you were transitioning, that previous to last year you were more focused on pastry, and lately you've been working in the bread labs.
Yeah, so I've been doing some bread, Mitch. So, you know, throughout my whole career, I've always done bread and pastry together. All the chefs that I've worked for wanted the bake shop, the pastry shop, also to do the bread for the restaurant, no matter where I was, whether I was in California at CIA or whether I was working for Ming. And so I've always liked doing both. But when I started working at Johnson & Wales about 14 years ago, I started doing just pastry, and that's what they needed. And so that's what I did. But I now have started doing more bread, and I like it. It's a different, you know, it's a different mindset, but I enjoy it. So doing some basic bread baking there, and it's mixing it up a little bit. So it's been good.
14 years. I remember your bench test in the little science lab.
Oh my gosh, that was so long ago.
It was, but I remember it well. You blew us all away.
Oh, thanks, Mitch. So what I want to show you here is we're going to make a quick little rhubarb jam. And let me just show you what I have here. So I made a little simple syrup. And the simple syrup is equal parts sugar and water. You just bring it up to a boil. I've put some vanilla bean in there. I've added sliced lemons, but I've already took the lemons out. And now I'm just going to dice up this fresh rhubarb. The rhubarb looked pretty good. It's still in the market. It still looks pretty good. And basically all I'm going to do is lightly poach them. And let me just take this back out of the way. And then I'm going to add it to some pre-made jams. You certainly can make your own jam, but I happen to have some strawberry rhubarb jam. One from Alaska. My sister lives in Alaska, so she sent me this strawberry rhubarb. It's actually pretty good. And then this one's available locally, and it's pretty good actually. This brand, this Trappist brand, maybe some of you guys have used it. It doesn't have a lot of junk in it, so it actually is pretty good, strawberry rhubarb preserve. So I kind of helped to flavor it a little bit more with rhubarb. And so to do that, we just poach off a little bit of rhubarb, mix it into the jam, and it's pretty quick. Dice them up.
Did you work with the filaments on the rhubarb at all? Do you trim that or peel them a little bit like celery, or do you leave it?
What do you mean about, what is the filament?
You know, like sometimes with celery, how you can pull the strands off and tenderize it a little bit or get it less stringy.
Oh yeah, actually I do that with celery a lot. No, I don't. This, I've just kind of left it. It doesn't seem too stringy to me.
Good, yeah. It might depend on, you know, which part of the season you get it. It might be more fibrous at different times, or depending on how long they let it go in the ground too.
Right.
Oh, that sounds so fresh.
Oh, it's so nice right now. Let me bring that pot over. So basically you can bring it up to a simmer and just throw your rhubarb in and let it sit there for a few minutes and it'll soften right up. You can also put it on a low heat, but just wash it carefully. You don't want it to overcook because you're gonna cook it some more when you add it to the tart. So you kind of want it al dente. Who doesn't like rhubarb? The strawberry and rhubarb is such a classic combination, you know? Okay, so let me just put this back here for a few minutes.
Do you ever make just rhubarb tarts, Marina?
Rhubarb, I haven't just made a straight rhubarb, but after making this little bit of jam and looking at it, how it baked off into the tart, I bet it would be really nice. Have you?
I haven't.
Okay, so the next step is to make a little bit of fruit filling for our jalousie. Well, actually, I'll assemble the strawberry rhubarb tart first, and then we'll go on to the jalousie. Turn on the oven. Okay. Keep one eye on the rhubarb because it's going to be ready here in just a second. But we can start prepping the strawberry pastry. So early this morning, I rolled out a bunch of dough and I cut out the tart from dough I already made. So the dough that I have that I'm laminating right now that's in the freezer, I'll continue to work with that and show you all the steps to that one. And then once that dough is ready, you roll it out so that it's about just, I would say about 1/8 of an inch thick. Okay, and this is for the strawberry rhubarb. To create that little design on the outside, see how it's kind of scalloped? We're going to do that.
Ronnie said she can smell the jam.
Oh, good. Okay, so I'm going to just take a cutter. That's about 2 inches, 2 inches in width, and just the handle side. And I'm going to mark as close as you can to the edge. You're going to make a little stencil, essentially. You're going to create a little pattern on the edge.
What is the measurement of your disc?
This is 10 inches.
Okay, thank you.
Now, once you have it marked, can you see that okay? It goes in the freezer for a few minutes.
Okay.
And it goes in the freezer because when we cut out the edge to this tart, the pastry has to be really, really cold, semi-frozen. So as you cut your design out, it's going to be nice and crisp, and you won't be pulling or tearing the dough, but you'll be kind of cutting through it like a razor. Okay, so in here I have some rhubarb that I've already cooked off. I've added it to the jam. And I'm going to go ahead and strain some of this off and add it to that. Oops, you don't want a whole lot of juice in there, so just. The colors are so pretty, you know, because you got the multicolor look to it. Two-tone look. Oh, a little bit more. And as you're mixing this, you just mix it so you like it. I've added both types of jam, and then, you add as much rhubarb as you like. You can also add, I suppose you could even add some fresh strawberries there, but we got fresh strawberries going on the top, so we really don't need to add more strawberries to it. Okay. Give that just a minute longer while we're waiting for that to chill. We'll get our bag ready. And I need this bowl to measure the inside of the tart, so I'll show you that here in just a second. So it's so nice, you can buy pastry bags, on Amazon, or the web stores, the restaurant stores have these disposable pastry bags. They tend to be quite large, so I cut them down quite a bit. Just fold it back so it's not too messy. And I'm going to be using about 4 to 6 ounces of the cream that goes to go inside of the tart.
And speaking of summer bounty, Marina, we have a class next week with Andrea Quillen from King Arthur, and she's it's preserving summer with sugar, basically preserving summer fruits with sugar.
I saw that. I might attend that one because she's going to do some jams, right?
Yeah, and then make a few shortbreads and different things to go with them. She did a lot of work in Sweden, and so she's going to show some of the stuff she learned over there with the jams.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and she has an interesting background. She also did a gastronomy program. Did I read that correctly?
I don't know.
I think she studied gastronomy over in Ireland, from what I think I read.
I think you're right. Yes.
Okay, so the pastry is pretty cold. I could keep it in there a little bit longer, but I think it's cold enough. So you want to put it on the board. Careful not to distort the shape. And you just want to take a very sharp knife, or I like to use an X-Acto knife because it'll cut really clean, sharp, cleanly and sharply.
And that avoids smearing the butter as well.
Now you can see them all these little pieces and re-roll them into another piece of dough to use for galette, or little wafers or cookies of some sort. at this stage, you want to move your pastry while it's still cold onto a piece of parchment paper, so that you can move the parchment around and move the pastry around without having to touch and move the pastry. It's starting to soften up already. Okay. Everybody with me, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, to create this little section in the middle here, I'm going to use this bowl to trace the center part. And I take my X-Acto knife and I basically draw a line with it. You try not to cut through the pastry too deep, about 1 millimeter or so, and very, very lightly just go around it. So I don't know if you can see it, but you see how it's very, very light? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, and what that does is it allows the edges to rise up a little bit and the center to stay down. Now the filling will also hold the center down, but I find I get a little bit better presentation if I score the edges of it, like so. And some of these are a little light, but.
So it's more of a mark than a cut, would you say?
Right, it's more of a scoring.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Next, we dock it a little bit. And pipe some filling on.
And that's another benefit of scoring that circle.
It helps, makes a little guide, yeah.
Yeah.
Everything stays in the center. And I've discovered that the tart that I made this morning probably has a little too much filling in it. Maybe I'll go a little lighter.
Well, that's so much easier than going in concentric circles. The way you just, that was awesome.
I'm gonna go lighter on this one because I think I got a little too much in there this morning. Okay, once. And you can smooth it out a little bit. Yeah, that definitely is enough. Just looking to see how long the pastry's been in the fridge, so we're still okay. I moved it to the fridge. Okay, so can you see okay?
Yes, perfect.
All right, so that piece is ready for the jam. And then we put some strawberries on it. Bring the cutting board back over. Now, you certainly could probably do this a lot of different ways, but I just kind of started to dot the pastry along with the filling like so. You probably also could just put a very thin layer on there. And you certainly could put more on it after it's baked. we'll go ahead and slide this onto a baking tray. Actually, yeah, let me cut off those. Let's see, there it is. We'll just trim the paper a little bit. So you don't really need that many. You can put some, the nice thing about this tart is you can add fresh fruit to it as well after that, which I think would be nice. Go to serve it, you have that contrast of the baked fruit and the fresh fruit. The strawberries I got yesterday look pretty good. So I just cut them in half. And just pull off that little green part. Try to keep the strawberry kind of intact. Without wasting too much. Okay, maybe we could just start putting the berries on. Maybe some of the bigger ones on the outer part. And they collapse, as they bake, so they're gonna collapse right in there. More. So Mitch, have you been doing some of your own baking lately?
No, I've just been eating other people's baking. And a lot of it. It's just been a little too hot for me to, in my kitchen on the second floor. It's too much in the summer.
Okay, that looks like it should do it. Let's see, I have egg wash around here. You don't have to egg wash the edge, but it does help to give it some nice color.
And what's in your egg wash?
A little pinch of salt. Sometimes I put a little milk in there, but today I don't have any milk or cream in it.
So it's just egg and salt, basically?
Yep. The one thing you want to be careful of is you don't want the egg to go down the edge, the cut edge. And that's going to kind of glue it together if it drips down the edge. So just very gently on the top. You can also add the egg wash before you throw it in the freezer, and it'll just dry on the pastry a little bit. That works too. And this way you don't have to put it on at the very last minute there. You can already have it on there when you are cutting the pastry. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so it's going to go in the oven probably for about 20 minutes. And then when it comes out, I'm gonna glaze the edge with rhubarb syrup, put some nuts on. I'll glaze the strawberries as well with the syrup, throw it back in the oven for a minute or two to set that glaze, and then that'll be done.
And what is your oven temperature setting?
I have it set at 415. I do have a convection setting, so it's on convection. I have baked these as hot as 425 in there. I do like them kind of nice and dark. So you just have to check your oven, make sure it's hot enough, at least 400, up to 425. If it doesn't have convection setting, you might have to go up to 450.
And would you remain at that temperature for the entire bake?
Yes.
Okay, great. And why is the puff pastry temperature so much higher than, say, like a tart crust or a pie crust?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so what we're trying to do is generate the steam to leaven the pastry so that the steam will start to flake apart those different layers that we've created. And that's where you get your flakiness and your rise out of the pastry.
So it's a physical leavener.
Mm-hmm. So how are we doing on time? Are we okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to give this pastry a fold. This is going to be the third fold, and then we'll put together the jalousie. How's that?
Great.
Move some of this away. All right. Everything takes longer than you think, right? It's amazing how fast the time goes by.
Well, don't worry about running over or anything like that. People can leave if they have to, and that they will get the recording within, I think, about 48 hours, and they can replay the finish. So we're all good. So it's better that you do it properly. We got a question. Can you bake the fruit tart the day before and add the fresh berries the day off?
Yeah.
And where would you store that tart if you had baked it the day before?
Yeah, I would store it in the refrigerator, and then when you get ready to serve it, maybe just warm it up in a low oven, like around 200-300 degrees, and just bring it up a little bit so that it re-crisp a little bit, but you don't really want to bake it too much more. And then you certainly can add some more fruit on top. So some fresh fruit garnished on top would be really nice. You have the crispiness of the crust, and then you have the filling, which should be really nice with the frangipane and the jam and all that.
Could you prepare the tart and leave it raw and then bake it that second day from the freezer, or would you thaw it, or would you just recommend not doing that at all?
It probably worked if I had to. Yeah, you could assemble it with the frangipane on top. It might do okay in the fridge. I probably would leave it in the fridge versus freezing it. If you put the frangipane on it. If it doesn't have any frangipane on it, I would freeze it maybe.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know about you guys, but it's getting awfully humid here.
It's pretty swampy in Providence too. We're about 50 miles apart, I think.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Betsy said it's 106 there on Sunday in Seattle.
Oh my
Are
gosh.
you in Seattle, Betsy, or Portland? I can't remember. Seattle, 106 in Seattle?
Wow.
That's got to be a record.
Yeah, you don't really hear about Seattle ever getting that hot. All right, so the third fold, it's looking pretty good. The butter's starting to ribbon and elongate through the dough. You can see how you can still see butter in there, but it's starting to elongate.
And it's so much easier to handle each time, it looks like.
Yeah, it sure is. And for a while here, you're going to see some dark and light spots to the dough. That's just because it's not fully mixed, you know, as far as the rolling and folding process continues to develop the gluten and essentially mix the dough. If you ask me, I think it's not really what you think of when you think about puff dough, but as you roll it and fold it together,
Betsy asked, so she can see the butter elongating now. Does it ever get a homogeneous look to it where it just looks like dough and not the butter streaking through it?
yeah, like right now it looks pretty homogeneous on that side. Yeah, so after this fold, when I do the last fold, you really shouldn't be able to see the butter in it. It will be, you know, it's there, but it will be somewhat invisible. Ooh, hot, hot, hot.
Yeah, we just got another message from Oklahoma that he said he's right on the edge of the heat and the humidity and the rain. And
okay, third fold. The time that it stays in the fridge is usually 30 to 45 minutes. You could, if you had to, you could put 3 folds in it, hold it over the next day and do the last fold the next day, but it's always best to try to get them in there in one day if you can.
John just asked, how do you keep your butter from breaking up? Is he maybe keeping it too cold if it's breaking up? John, are you talking about when you're rolling it that it breaks? Yes, when he's rolling it, the butter's breaking.
Yeah, so the butter's too cold. It's, you know, maybe you just left it in the fridge too long and it got too cold, or maybe it wasn't worked enough in the dough in the first part. You know, when you're mixing it in the bowl, maybe you just need to work the butter a little bit more. The other thing that you could try is you could pound your butter and make it a little bit pliable before you put it in the bowl in the initial stage, and that will soften the butter a little bit so it's not so chunky and hard. So a couple little options there to try.
Yeah, when it gets cold, it stays it stays firm, so it can't elongate.
Right. Yeah. So you could also try, if that happens, sometimes it does happen to me where I have little chunks of butter left in the dough at the very end on the last fold, more than I would like to see. And you could try rolling that last roll a little longer and wider than you normally would to see if you can try to compress and layer that butter in there. Does that make sense? All right, so on to the jalousie. Keep one eye on the oven here. It's baking pretty fast. Yeah. Okay, yeah, wow, that was fast. So I set the oven for 12 minutes and it's just about there. So, jalousie, let's start on a couple of things. First thing is the fruit. So So I've got peaches, cherries, blackberries. We'll just do a little combination here. So I'm not taking the skin off of this because when it cooks, it does tend to soften. So I'm going to leave it on, but if you don't like the skin, you can pull it off. You can either use a peeler or you can blanch it. The white peaches I got at the store were pretty nice. And I'm cutting them kind of thin. When I do apple jalousie, I will just leave the apples like this, and I would layer it like that in the pastry. But since I have a lot of different fruit, I'm just going to toss them together. And so I'm going to make them a little smaller. Let's see. Oh, the peach smells so good.
Do you know where they were grown?
I do not. But isn't everything grown down there in Georgia and South Carolina?
Oh. I've been getting tomatoes from Canada for some reason in the stores here. Yeah.
So I'm cutting the fruit down a little bit too, because, when it sits in the pastry, when we go to fill this, if it's too bulky, it's not going to lay flat when you put the top cover on. And so I kind of cut it down a bit. Even the cherries, I'll cut a little bit. And I'm just going to cut the ends off just for speed, but I'll eat the rest of those cherries. Yes, I want the pieces to be kind of small. So my cat must be doing okay upstairs because I don't hear her. She's not whining. She would be into everything if she's down here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would be into everything too if I were there. It looks good.
Okay, so now what we want to do is just set this aside. And 2 more minutes on that. Put a squeeze of lemon in there. And I have a little sugar to toss with that, but I'm not going to put the sugar on there until the pastry is ready, because you know how when you put sugar on fruit, it has this juice that begins to settle in the bottom of the bowl, and it gets a little too soggy. So we want to toss it with a little sugar right before it goes into the pastry. And I'm going to bring that pastry out here in just a second and show you what it looks like. We're going to have a little syrup going on top of this. We'll bring it on over. And some toasted nuts. Okay, so as soon as this comes out of the oven, you have to brush it with the syrup.
Approximately how long was it in the oven? Did you time it or do you know offhand?
It was, about 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And that is a bold bake. That's good.
Yeah. And then it's going to go back in just to stick the nuts onto it and make the glaze dry.
Are those almond slices, were they toasted?
Yeah, pre-toasted because it's not going to stay in the oven long enough to toast them.
Right.
So yeah, pre-toasted. Yep. Okay, back in for 1 minute. Now I noticed, see, even on this one, so we might drop the temperature on the last few minutes of baking so that the center gets a little bit more baked. It's just, I noticed it happened on this one too. The center was just a little underbaked, so you could drop the temp a little bit towards the end of baking just so that it bakes all the way. Okay, so that one is done. Let that cool. And now we'll assemble the jalousie.
I think we've all appreciated how clean and neat and organized your station has remained the whole time. And it's just so nice.
Yeah, I get lost if it's any other way. Okay, so again, I've rolled the pastry out earlier this morning so that it would be nice and cold when I work with it. Move the pastry onto the bench. I'm going to move this over here. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this so I can work with one section at a time. And as you're looking at your pieces, you want to use the thinnest piece for the bottom because the filling tends to weigh it down and it won't be as gummy if you use the thinner piece on the bottom. This other piece, I'm going to pop in the freezer for a couple minutes. That'll be the top. And so we want to get this bottom piece ready. Take a little egg wash and just line the center, or I'm sorry, the perimeter of the bottom with a little bit of egg wash so we can stick the top piece to the bottom piece. And I don't want to add the fruit until I'm ready with the top. So we'll give that just another second there, just to chill. You need a ruler, a bench scraper, and we'll cut the slats in the top. Now, it's probably a good idea to make a little dusting of flour on top because we're going to fold the pastry on top of itself. And we don't want it to stick. Put the ruler at the very edge. Fold it over so that it meets. You want, I don't know if you can see this. So what I'm doing is I'm finding the edge of the ruler and I'm going to cut my slats right there. And I want the two sides to kind of match up. So I need to look to see if they're kind of matched up. Does that make sense, Mitch?
Yes, and I've never seen anyone do it over a ruler like that. It's usually freehand. This is awesome.
And then you can cut them as close or as far apart as you want. I do about a finger's worth.
So you're cutting up to the ruler so that you're not totally cutting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if the dough was a little colder, it probably wouldn't stick as much like it is, but that's okay. We can make it work.
Yeah, it's probably the humidity too.
Yep.
You're getting some appreciation from the attendees.
Ah,
Yeah, they're loving the class.
okay. Okay, so now we're ready for the fruit to go on the bottom. Let me just move this over for a second. Oh, actually, let's put the bottom piece on the pan so we don't have to move it once it's filled. Now I can toss this with a little bit of sugar. As much or as little or no sugar at all if you don't want. So remember, only toss this with the sugar once you're ready to fill. Actually, let me see if I can do this a little quicker. Try to keep it right in the center. Press it down just a little bit. Add more fruit if it looks like you need more fruit, but I think this is probably good enough. If the top pastry starts to become a little too soft, just pop it in the refrigerator. And I'm going to just roll it up on my rolling pin. Now you have to match the top to the bottom. See, the pastry is a little soft because it's so muggy in here. All right, well, yeah, it's getting a little soft. Okay, so now what I usually do is crimp the edge, and we can trim it a little bit too. So not to worry if the edges look a little rough. I crimp the inside just with the rounded side of the spoon. And the pastry's a little soft because it's so muggy and hot in here. by going on the inside versus pinching the very edge, you'll get a little more height to the pastry than you would if you would take a fork to the edge or compress it on the very edge.
Wow, interesting.
So I'm going to pop this in the freezer for a couple minutes so I can trim the edge and make it look a little nicer, and then also put a little cream on top.
I have a procedural question. Do you know, when you fabricate puff pastry, we typically put the finished product in the refrigerator. It might be for a couple of hours before we bake it. Do you find the same need for that with the Blitz Puff Pastry? Is it just as important or as long?
Oh, you mean the resting period before you bake?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You want to rest it. So, which is another reason why I rolled that pastry out early this morning, so that when it gets baked off, it won't shrink up. You know how pastry tends to shrink up on you?
Yes.
When you bake it? So your pieces the integrity of the shape will stay more intact if you rest the pastry several hours or let it rest overnight.
Great, thank you.
Okay, let's see what is left here. Let's see, the last fold was at 220. It's been 20 minutes. We'll give it another few more minutes and then we'll do the last fold. We'll give that one pastry a few more minutes in the freezer, and then I'll trim it and pop it into the oven. Any questions out there?
Yes, if you have any questions, now's a good time.
Yeah, while we have a little downtime. This is just a little heavy cream. I brushed the top of the jalousie with heavy cream and dust it with sugar. You could use an egg wash too if you like.
Oh, Betsy's asking, based on your spoon with the puff pastry, could you do that on empanadas or pie dough too?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And you dip the spoon in flour every couple of presses too, or every press?
Well, I only needed to because the pastry was so soft. Usually when the pastry is nice and cold, it won't really stick to the spoon.
Oh, great.
So a little heavy cream here. A little sugar. Let's see, what else can I tell you about puff pastry? As far as the history of puff pastry, I mean, it's been around for hundreds of years. I mean, this type of pastry, based upon research that I've done, you know, just here and there over the years, and recently in the classes that I'm taking, you know, this type of pastry where you put butter between the pastry, people have been doing that for a couple hundred years, it seems to me, at least the recipes I've been looking at. And so, you know, the thought is that puff pastry came into fashion with the famous chef Carême, Antonin Carême, but it's been done before his time. I mean, there was puff pastry, styles of puff pastry being done even before Carême's period, which is kind of interesting, right? Sometimes we don't think about the evolution of all these pastries, but people have been using dough for all kinds of things for so long.
We have a question. Someone wants to know why your formula is expressed in US imperial measurements of pounds and ounces rather than metric. Are you just more comfortable with that?
You know, it's just, you know, what I learned when I was going through culinary school, we were using pounds and ounces. So it's just something I kept doing. But as a pastry chef out in the industry, I would buy chocolate in kilograms. So I would really have to know the conversion factor and how to compute all of that. So I'm more comfortable with pounds and ounces, but I use metric as well. But my recipes are typically in US measurements.
Thank you.
Okay, that pastry's probably ready to.
Oh, you're talking about how things change. I was reading a book today that was printed in 1903, and they're talking about fresh milling.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and all of a sudden it's a big thing again. So it was pretty interesting to see that it was called the Schweitzer method back in the early 1900s in Hungary.
Really?
Yeah. There's some old baking books on Google Books that you can read for free. I was reading Sylvester Graham's book this week.
Oh, yeah, he has an interesting story, huh?
Oh, the book is fascinating.
Yeah, that's something about, I don't know what it is. I guess a lot of people find it interesting, you know, to read about the history of food and food history and all of that.
I do.
All right, so see, it looks a little better now that I trimmed it. And now
Yeah.
the pastry's a little colder. When I go to put the cream on, the cream will adhere to the pastry a little bit better. And you don't want a lot of cream because it will burn, but it adds a nice color. And also when you put the sugar on top, it adds a nice, it makes its own glaze, essentially. The sugar melts into the cream and it gets to be, I'll show you on that one piece that's finished already, but.
We have a question. You could go ahead and give the Blitz all the folds and then just freeze it in bulk.
Yeah.
And then how would you handle it from there?
Take it out the day before you want to use it, put it in the fridge, let it thaw in the fridge, and then just cut the pieces off that you need and roll it out, let it rest after you roll it. Basically it.
And are you using coarse sugar?
You could use either. I tend to like to use the finer sugar, but
It dissolves more readily and gives you a better glaze.
oh yeah, that's true too. If you're looking for that effect, yeah, it will. All right, let me pop this in. Typically, this takes about 20 to 30 minutes. They've been baking a little faster today for whatever reason. Maybe I rolled the dough a little thinner. So I'll set the timer for 12 and take a peek.
And you're still at the 425-ish temperature?
Yeah, I'm at 415.
415.
For this pastry, it's probably good because, you know, I don't have a filling on top that might get overcooked. So 415 is good there. So let me show you again what I'm talking about as far as the glaze effect.
Can I ask you a real quick question while we look at, oh, that's gorgeous. But we have a question, is the cake flour that you use bleached?
It is not.
Okay.
It's King Arthur.
King Arthur. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not.
So, yeah, if you would hold that back up to the camera for us too. I distracted you, I'm sorry.
Oh, this is the cake flour.
Oh, thank you.
And then see, I don't know if you can tell really, but you see how you had little glistening sections here with the sugar and the cream?
Yes.
All right, let's see. I guess I'll do that last fold, even though it is a little early, that's okay. Well, you know, may not get as many layers that I would typically like by rushing it a little bit, but let's take a look at the dough and see how it looks. And it's been in the freezer, so it feels pretty chilled. The trick is as you get to the last couple folds, the dough gets tighter and tighter, you know, so it gets a little bit more of a struggle to roll it out. Dry it off a little bit. maybe I left it in the freezer a little too long, but it's moving. This is where you get a workout, right? Doing all the rolling. I've often wondered, I've thought about buying a pasta machine to see if I could roll my pastry through the pasta machine. Has anybody tried that?
I've heard of people trying it. I've done it for crackers, but not
A dough?
especially a layered dough. I just haven't
Because
even.
they're automated now, right?
Yeah.
Haven't used one in a long time.
We have a question. Someone has bleached enriched cake flour. Should she just use all AP, or should she still use the blend as you suggest?
If it were me and that's all I had, I would just use the bleached cake flour, unless there's some particular reason you don't want to use the bleached flour. That's what I would do.
Okay.
AP is going to be a little stronger, and you wouldn't want to substitute AP for the cake. What you could do is just go all AP, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that was her question.
Oh, right. Yeah, you could. Yeah, definitely. All right, well, looking pretty good. See what the other side looks like. Now, you see how it has a little curve here? I know
Yeah.
a lot of people are wondering, how do you get that little curve to straighten out? Well, you just put a little pressure in there like that. Get it to straighten out sometime. Yeah, this could have relaxed a little bit more. It does feel a little stiff. All right, you guys, I think I'm ready to give this the last fold. Sometimes I look and see what side I want on the inside, what side I want on the outside. The butter streaks are, I can still see them in there. However, when I go to roll it out to use it, they're going to continue to flatten out and elongate in the dough. So I'm not too concerned there. Actually, it might even be a good thing that I see them so that I know that the butter and the dough are kind of still separate. When the butter warms up, and the dough, and it merges too much with the dough, you lose your layers that way. All right.
Very nice.
So, can you kind of see it very well? It looks like
Yes.
it's pretty homogeneous there. And so just to let you know, so the amount of pastries that you can get from this block here, this is a 27-ounce block, is that right? 24-ounce block, 25-ounce block. When I go to use this, I cut it in half and I use half at a time. From a half a block, you can get one of the tarts, and from the other half of the block, you can get your jalousie. Then you're going to have extra dough there, and if you roll the pieces carefully, you can get one more jalousie out of that if you roll it correctly. Now, the jalousie in the recipe says 16 inches, but I only did 12 inches because I didn't use the pastry lengthways. I cut the pieces off rather than make the jalousie 16 inches this way. I cut 12-inch pieces this way. So you can get 3 12-inch pieces out of 1/2 block. And what else did I want to tell you? So this pastry would yield at least 2 of the strawberry rhubarb tart and 1 jalousie, or 1 strawberry tart and 2 jalousies.
Can I just tell you, the very first time I saw the word, I called it jalousies.
Jalousie. Jalousie, jalousie. I think there's a lot of different pronunciations. I don't even know if it's jalousie. I think a lot of people pronounce it that way.
I think it's a jalousie.
Jalousie. Americans, we always butcher the French pronunciation. Yeah. So if you were going to use this, you would want to let it rest overnight in the refrigerator. Or if you're not going to use it for a long time, just freeze it. Maybe cut it in half and freeze it in smaller pieces so you can take out what you want. And that one in there has about a few minutes left of baking, and that's pretty much it.
That's great.
That was over a little bit, but.
Well, we're getting comments in. Great class. I enjoyed it a lot. I always enjoy watching the way you work and the meticulous nature and the all the detailed finishes, and fork, spoon, cake ring cutter, using all the different tools to achieve the little details that you are seeking. Yeah, it's really good.
Thanks, Mitch.
Do we have any? I was just going to ask if we had any final questions from anyone. Dennis and Carolyn said it was very informative and interesting. We're asking how to find the recording. I believe Rebecca makes that available within a couple of days. The recording, the link will be good for 2 weeks. So what you need to do is save the link and it'll be yours permanently. What other products do you like to make with the Blitz Puff Pastry?
Let's see. You know, the little palmiers, the elephant ears are really nice to make out of Blitz Puff Pastry. There's all kinds of different little biscuit types of things that you can make from it that are pretty quick and easy. Probably apple galettes, you know, would be really nice with this dough. Any kind of shape, whether it be long shaped or round.
That's actually the two things you mentioned, the palmier and the apple galette are the two items on the certified viennoiserie exam with the Blitz Puff.
Wow.
So you're ready.
Yay. Sign me up.
Do you ever do sourdough-based pastry?
You know, I haven't.
You know, I've done it with some of these doughs, and what I do is, well, use liquid levain, and then use that for part of your flour and part of your water. You subtract that from the total formula, and I've done it. I did a sourdough apple pie not too long ago, well, before I retired from Johnson and Wales. I guess it was long ago, but I really enjoyed it. I don't know that you can really taste it, but I think it gives the dough a little more character more than flavor.
Yeah, and does it add a little leavening to it at all, or?
A little bit, you know, you don't really let a pie sit around like you would a bread, because then, like you say, all those juices would just start macerating right into the dough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Something that would be fun to try.
Yeah, I did it with a poulish too.
Oh. This thing is almost ready.
Connie Cox said, thanks for taking the time to present the class, including the prep and cleanup. She thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. Welcome, welcome.
Yeah, she takes a lot of classes, so she's a keen observer. She knows a good one when she sees it.
Wow. Well, it's always hard to tell from this end because I'm, you know, got things everywhere.
Well, it was a great class, and I think we have all the questions. Do you want to can you show us from the prepared ones? Can you cut a slice for us?
Oh, yeah. We'll give that 2 more minutes there. Actually, we can take it. Well, I'll just leave it in there.
I'm laughing. Someone just asked if you're going to send each attendee one of the tarts.
Airmail.
Deborah's saying, thank you, Marina. Great demo.
Okay.
One thing I'd like to point out to everyone, it's something, you know, you do after you've been in the business for a long time. Everything you do is in anticipation of the next step. And I've observed that with you all the way through, that you don't just do something, you get it ready for the next step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, even thinking about the demo today, I've been doing this a number of years, right? But even today, I had to really think about process, you know, what's going to come next? How is the timing going to go? Am I going to be able to have things finished on time and the steps done on time so that it flowed well? Let's see here. Make sure I'm not going to burn this one. So let's see here. And can you kind of see that?
Can you bring it a little closer to us and rotate it, angle it just a little bit? Yeah, there we go. Lift it just a couple of inches. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
So,
Lovely.
yeah, it looked like it came out pretty good. Oops, oven. And I could cut into the other one too. That one's going to be a little hot. So let me cut into this one that I made earlier today.
It's really encouraging to see professional looking pastry produced in a home kitchen.
You know, and it's not easy. Like I said, first off.
Don't say that.
Oh, well, trying to organize yourself at home is definitely much more a challenge than.
I know. Every time you turn around, there's something else in your way or.
So this one, I can, let's see.
So you actually slice that rather than cutting it.
Yeah, I think it works better with the serrated.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but can you see the inside okay?
Not real well. If you can get it closer to the camera again. Oh, yes. And it looks like your pastry on the bottom stayed, it didn't get gummy.
Right, yeah, it was, well, you know, there might be a little bit there, but not a lot. That's why it's nice to roll that bottom piece kind of thin.
And also wait to sugar your fruit.
Yeah, oh, right, yeah, that's a big thing. Whether you're making apple galettes or whatever kind of pastry you're filling with a sugared filling, a filling that you're going to add sugar to. You've probably come across that in all the years that you've been baking too, huh?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think we're just about at the end, Marina. It's been a great class. Everyone enjoyed it. I know I did. I hope you did.
I did, yeah, it kept me on my toes.
Well, I just want to thank you and all the attendees for supporting the Bread Bakers Guild of America. You can find us at www.bbga.org. We're your resource for artisan baking education. So we'll see you next time. Thank you, Marina.
All right, Miss, take care.
Have a good weekend, everyone.